Well, no class on modern historical methods in the U.S. would be complete without taking some time to discuss our love-hate relationship with Turabian-style formatting. If you're the average student coming up from undergrad and moving on, it can be a frustrating experience dealing with all these different styles. Depending on your minor and the gen ed courses you took, you can get jerked around back and forth between the various options, and just when you think you've gotten one down, another professor requires you to do something in a completely different style. Historically, at TFC, this class in particular might be that moment for you. Because at least when I was a student at Toccoa, all TFC classes were required to use MLA formatting. So where is this Turabian stuff coming from? Well, Turabian is pretty much the universal professional standard of scholarly history. And if you're going to graduate with a degree in history, you need to have at least experienced it. Preferably, you need to know how to use it well. If you're thinking about graduate school or even publication, you'll definitely need it. So hang in there while we delve into the exciting world of Turabian paper formatting. Also, let's go ahead and get an important clarification out of the way. You'll hear people also talking about Chicago-style formatting, and sometimes it all gets mashed up into Turabian/Chicago. The reason for that is Turabian is in fact a simplification of the Chicago Manual of Style. So the two can be used somewhat interchangeably depending on the circumstances. To begin with, let's address the elephant in the room. Why don't we use MLA or APA for history? Those are both solid styles that are the professional standards of publication for literature, education, psychology, and law. It seems like we should be able to use either just as well, right? MLA stands for Modern Languages Association and APA for the American Psychological Association. Both of their systems are similar in that they rarely use footnotes or endnotes. Instead, they put their citations in parentheses at the end of the sentence where the material they referenced is located. This is called, not surprisingly, parenthetical referencing. You can see that illustrated here. The main difference between the two is that APA generally requires the author to use the name of the person they are citing in the sentence itself. So rather than simply sticking a citation at the end of a sentence, it actually affects how you compose the sentence. These references obviously aren't much use by themselves, though. Even if readers know who Sherman is in this example, how do you know what book or article this comes out of? Both of these styles then point you, of course, to the infamous Works Cited or reference page at the back of the paper, where all of the sources are listed in more detail. That, of course, requires a lot of flipping back and forth, and it also explains why, if you've ever submitted a hard copy paper old school style in one of these formats, you'll often get it back from your professor with the last few pages torn off and then restapled. Note in passing that despite popular belief, a works cited and a bibliography aren't the same thing. We'll come back to that in a bit, but for now, if you've been laboring under that misapprehension, dislodge it. The problem for both is that they are very good at doing one thing in particular, tracking individual quotations. Now, if they're good at it, why is it a problem? Well, it's because historians need to do much, much more with their research in their writing. Historians are notoriously suspicious people. We want to see all the research and all the details right there at our fingertips, not buried away in a works cited page that we have to dig through. Further, we don't just use citations when we have to quote. We try to bring all our research to bear throughout the entirety of the paper. That means that we'll often be citing several sources at a time in a single note, and in other times we'll be quoting from multiple authors in the same paragraph. We also often use what's called a content citation, where we don't actually quote at all or even directly reference the source in the paper directly. For example, at the end of a paragraph, we might add a reference that cites half a dozen different books with page numbers that support our general information in that paragraph and points readers to further resources. Also, we use our footnotes to give a running commentary on our text. For instance, in my dissertation, I had conflicting sources on whether my subject was born in 1826 or 1827. After working through and analyzing the various documents, I landed on the 1827 date. While that is the kind of thing you should and need to discuss and explain in a scholarly history book, very few people, even scholars, really need to know those details. So, do I start my whole book with a bland recitation of dates that no one cares about? Certainly not. Instead, in my first chapter, I started straight into the details of Henry Slocum's life, and then I tucked the source discussion away in a footnote for the few who needed it. You can do these sorts of things with MLA or APA, but not as easily. Turabian formatting is tuned to the kind of writing that history and theology need to do, and that's why it's the standard. You might now ask, well, why did these formats get used for history at all, ever? The answer is simple, and it's also why the parenthetical reference was invented in the first place. Typewriters. You may have never used an old-style hammer-away-at-it typewriter, but while they were a massive improvement over handwriting, they fall far short of the convenience of a computer. If you want to add a footnote using a computer, a few clicks will do it and it magically appears. If you want to do that with a typewriter, it's quite the production. First, you have to get to the end of your sentence. Then you turn the drum one click up and type the number to get the superscript number. Then you figure out how many lines your footnote will need, which can be a trick since you can't type it on the typewriter. You scoot to the bottom of the page and you click back the number of turns on the drum to make up the space that you think you'll need. Then you take a pencil and you draw a very light line on the page that you can erase later to remind you to save the space. Then you go back to typing at the top of the page. The next time you need another note, you repeat the process, but this time you start from your pencil mark to make sure that you've kept room for both notes. Finally, when you get to the bottom of the page at your mark, you type out all the notes with their corresponding numbers. The real kicker is that if you make a mistake, if you find out you didn't save enough space or that you need an extra footnote, you'd have to start the whole page over again. When you put it in that light, parenthetical references are God's gift to the scholar. No rigmarole, no foresight. All you do is open parenthesis, type the author's name, date, and page number, close parenthesis, and boom, done. Thankfully, we're long past the age of typewriters, so you should be using footnotes for your historical study, though you might think back to these earlier generations who didn't have it as good as you. Obviously, the secret, quote-unquote, to Turabian's flexibility is the footnote or endnote. Footnotes go at the bottom of the page on which their number occurs in the footer, while the endnote comes at the, end of the paper or document in one big list. Footnotes and endnotes are basically blank checks. In a real way, they are the best of both worlds. You're not limited to a certain length of space, so you can go on for extended citations or discussions with a minimum of disruption to your text. The history profession generally uses footnotes, and so you should prefer those over endnotes and parenthetical citations, unless specifically allowed or encouraged to do otherwise. If you look here, you can perhaps see what I mean about the advantages of the footnote over parenthetical references. Here, I needed to cite 6 different authors in one note to show the variety of corps commanders who supported the particular claim that I'm making. Even with author and page number only, the citation is longer than the original sentence. Imagine how difficult it could be to read the paper if you had citations like this every few sentences. You'd spend most of your time skipping over words you aren't actually even reading. That interrupts flow and can actually even interfere with understanding. You don't always know that the words you're skipping are ones you should be skipping. Instead, consider the same sentence using a footnote. All of that information is compressed into a tiny, inoffensive number at the end of the sentence. If you need to, you can look down to the bottom of the page and find everything that you could want. If not, you can read on with a minimum of disruption. It also works wonderfully for those tangential points that really need to be covered, even if they don't need to be emphasized in the main text. Like the birth year example I gave, you can take the time you need to explain in solid detail what's going on without derailing your general train of thought in the main text. So I hope it's clear that the use of Turabian isn't just an arbitrary decision. It's a good one, and once you're past the learning period, it should make your life easier. Let's go over the basic processes and logic then. What are the parts of a Turabian paper? Turabian uses a title page, though without a running head. You don't number your title page or include it in the numbering, which is something that sets Turabian apart from other styles. Your first page of actual text should be numbered page 1. If you don't know how to do that, first set your headers to different first page. That will leave the first page blank and allow you to insert a separate page number into the header on page 2. If you do that, it will show that page 2 is page 2. Now go into your page number settings and set it to start counting at 0. That will keep the title page numberless, it won't count in the total, and the first page of text will show as 1. Just a warning, if you're working on a larger project like a dissertation that might have something like a table of contents, the process is more complex. You'll need to learn how to use the sections feature in Word. There are tutorials out there on how to do that. Beyond that, you'll use 1-inch margins on every page, and you'll always double space. The newer forms of Turabian do have standards and instructions for parenthetical references, though as we've said before, it's best to use footnotes for history papers. If you insist on using parentheses, make sure you check with your professor or editor first. They might reject your paper as improperly formatted otherwise. Do note that Turabian references look different from MLA and APA versions in that Turabian needs both date and page number in addition to author's surname. One question I hear is, how often should I put a citation to my research and sources into my paper? You need to provide citations and references to supporting information for anything that you think someone might question or be unfamiliar with. And of course, you must use a citation anytime you copy someone else's words or ideas directly. I generally advise taking a twofold approach. First, and most obviously, as we said, anytime you directly quote from someone, you need a footnote and a citation immediately to where you saw the quote. People want to know the specifics of how to find the exact version of what you were looking at when you copied that quote. For example, edition and publisher and date and URL, because details sometimes differ between various published versions. That helps you too, because if anyone ever questions a difference between their version and yours, you can show exactly where you got it from. Next, you should also provide plenty of those content references we mentioned throughout the paper. Sometimes this happens when you paraphrase someone and adopt an idea or theory that they coined. If you do, immediately give a footnote. Beyond that, after doing all the hard work of your research, I would make the most of it. I would connect as many sources to as many different places in your paper as you legitimately can. One way to do that is to put a footnote at the end of each paragraph and cite all the sources and locations that you used in composing that paragraph in one note. It won't be unheard of for you to have 40 or more footnotes in a paper of less than 10 pages. And when you talk about your full thesis paper, up to and even exceeding 100 footnotes isn't at all unheard of. As we've mentioned before elsewhere, the more you deploy your sources, the more weight it gives your paper and the more seriously people will take you. While it's theoretically possible you could overdo it, it's hard to accomplish in practice. So the more the merrier. As for the actual formatting in action, it can get a little tricky. There are actually two different forms of note that you use in Turabian, one for the footnotes and one for the bibliography. I can tell when people rush the process because they'll look up Turabian citation and start sticking bibliographic formatting into their footnotes. I see it enough that I've saved an automatic comment on my computer for it. The footnote form is different for a reason. It guides you not just to the general source, but to the very specific place that you need to go in order to lay eyes on the specific information being used. This is the most basic footnote form for a scholarly book at the time of this recording. The very first time you use a source in a paper, you need to provide all of the pertinent information in the note. So we give the author's full name, first name and then last name, the book's title in italics, then in parentheses you give the book's city of publication, publisher and publication date, followed by the page or location number where you saw the specific information or quote. The general idea is that I should be able to take your note and take your paper and lay my hands on the exact same thing that you were looking at when you wrote it. After that first reference, since you've already provided all of the details to your attentive reader, you can use a shortened version. Usually, that's simply the author's last name followed by the page or location number. If you're using more than one book by the same author, you give a shortened form of the title to eliminate confusion. And here comes the possibly awkward bit. If by chance you are using the exact same source more than once in a row, you can simply put ibid in italics. Ibid is a Latin term that basically means ditto to what came before. That is also why it's put in italics. It's actually a foreign language. While technically that's the only way you should use it, if it's the exact source and page as the one before, more recently people have taken to adding a page number to point readers to the same source but clarify a different page number. Now, if I tried to walk you through every possible iteration of note of every kind of book, article, magazine, letter, diary, interview, documentary, and unpublished source that you might encounter, we'd never end this lecture. My best advice to those of you with a serious enough interest in history to take a history major or minor is to get a copy of Kate Turabian's book in whatever edition is the most recent and keep it handy. There are various and sundry online shortened versions of it out there too, often from college and university writing centers, but frankly, they can sometimes lead you astray, especially in their example papers. If you really are serious about being a professional historian, I would go right to the source. And then at the end of it all, we have, of course, our bibliography. I find that some students seem to think this is optional. It isn't. It's an integral part of the whole paper experience. This is the place where you give your reader a broad view of your total research. There is no works cited page in a traditional Turabian paper. Why do you need one anyway? All your citations are in your footnotes, so adding a works cited is literally repeating yourself to no point. Still, some people will stick works cited at the top of what is essentially a bibliography. Some do this accidentally, and others perhaps do it thinking that bibliography and works cited are more or less synonymous. They aren't. There is a notable difference between them. Specifically, in a works cited, you provide only the information on the specific sources that you overtly used and quoted from and cited in your paper. So if a book or article doesn't appear directly in the notes of your paper or in the paper itself, it does not go in the work cited, because obviously it is an uncited work. In a bibliography, you showcase all of the books or sources you legitimately used in your research, whether or not they actually made it into the final product. Therefore, you'll include more sources in a bibliography than you would in a works cited. To be clear, I need to lay an emphasis on sources you legitimately used when I talk about bibliographies. Can you use a book you looked through quickly, found that you didn't really need because you had that information elsewhere, and then set to the side? Yes. Should you look up a list of books you've never seen, nor read, nor ever even been in the same room with, though these books happen to be on a similar topic to the one you're talking about, should you add those books to your bibliography? In the words of the great John Cleese of Monty Python, definitely not. When you put a book in your bibliography, it implies that you've been through it and you know something about it. Therefore, you're recommending it to your reader on some level. Just sticking in unread books to make your list look longer is called padding your bibliography, and it's really a form of lying. As we mentioned, bibliographic formatting is different than what you use in footnotes. Here you're providing an easily referenced list of everything you encountered in your research, so it makes sense to list it alphabetically. You'll note then that here we give the last name first, followed by a comma, and then the first name of the author. Everything else is trimmed down. We have the title, publication city, publisher, and date. Since we have the page numbers in our notes, we don't really need them here. There is one small quirk worth noting. When you're formatting your bibliography, the tabs are inverted. Usually, the first line of a new paragraph is tabbed in, and the second and beyond are flush with the margin. In your bibliography, the start of a note is flush with the margin, and any other lines you may need are tabbed in once. The next source starts back on the margin, and the process is repeated like you see here. All right, let's take a quick view of what it all looks like when it's put together. As we go, please do feel free to pause whenever you like to take a closer look at individual pages. Here is a basic title page. The title goes about a third of the way down the page, and then the author's name and class information unfold at about 2/3 of the way down. For my general classes, I like this pared down approach, but note that your full thesis in a more formal setting would require a more specific formatting. There is a detailed Turabian title page in all of the guides that dictates what you should use down to the specific language and font size. Make sure you look that up and check with your instructor on the requirements if you aren't sure. Note, there's no running head here, and no page number is shown. This is an example of a first page of text. You'll notice the author's name and page number, starting with the number 1 in the upper right. You'll see examples of direct quotations, content references, and discussion of evidence on the page and in the notes. This is a page from a bit further on in the paper, and you'll notice some of the subsequent short-form references that we've mentioned. The books by Fox and Fans are the only ones used in this particular paper by those authors, so it's just the author's name and page number. The Catton book, on the other hand, is one of several that famous author had that pop up in this paper, so that note also has a shortened form to help differentiate between them. And finally, you have a full-page bibliography, and you'll notice the lack of page numbers for the books, like we mentioned. It's worth noting as we go along that there are other kinds of sources that, when you put them in your bibliography, will have page numbers associated with them. Specifically, sources that are contained inside a larger work, like an article inside a scholarly journal or a chapter inside a specific book. In cases like that, you would give the full range of pages that the article occurs on inside the larger work. Just make sure you look up the specific details in a guide to be sure. And now, our obligatory one last point. As I've mentioned several times, I strongly recommend getting a copy of the Turabian manual and keeping it handy. On important projects, don't just assume you know how to do it. Check. That's because while Turabian has remained largely the same over the years, the standards do sometimes shift. Kate L. Turabian herself actually died way back in 1987, so the Turabian style is now very much a legacy project. Her manual is on its 9th edition, and there are more coming down the pike. That means that it isn't at all impossible that there will be changes. I heard some rumors of some within the past few weeks, in fact. Given that this is a recorded lecture, it will sadly begin to be dated from the minute I finish it. So check yourself and check your work with the most recent versions that there are out there. And remember too that your instructors and future editors are in the same boat you are. It's entirely possible that you may hear about and implement a change before they do. If that's the case, just keep your most recent copy of Turabian handy. In the end, you'll need to give them what they want, but at least you can demonstrate that you did your due diligence. Now, I don't know that I dare say, go enjoy Turabian, but I hope that understanding all of this and the logic behind it a little bit better will at least help you to use it more effectively and with less frustration.